But it's a pleasure for me to be here with you, and hopefully we'll have a very positive and enriching discussion about the debate of Islamic norms in the Arab countries. And I think for many of us who are observing and watching what is occurring in the Arab world today and the Muslim world, on a personal level, I say it's about time. Right? On a more real, deeper level, it's been in the making for quite some time. And the debates are beginning. They're a very rich debate in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Yemen, in Syria, in Jordan, in Bahrain, which tends to be left off the map. But we are seeing transformation, and possibly one of those transformations that we are witnessing is the place of Islam, and in particular the place of Islamic groups and organizations that are attempting to engage in the political process and enter into what we could broadly say the civil society. It definitely will be a highly contested space, and we will see what will be the outcome in the near future. So hopefully in this session we'll have some discussion. I know that we'll have one paper, but we have both Charles, and I'll chime in as much as possible, but we'll leave it both to Charles and Enrique Klaus to really have the floor for discussion. And then we have many in here around the table that I know, see personally, and I recognize that they will be able to come in and engage in the discussion. So I'll turn to Enrique and give him the floor to speak about scandals in Egypt and the manufacturing of religious norms in the public spheres. And then I'll introduce Charles to respond to the paper. So, okay.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the Berkeley University and the European Institute in Florence, and especially Professor Olivier Roy. It's off. So I thank them for the invitation, and also I thank Hedi Riz for the organization, and I'm particularly thankful that my presentation was scheduled in the morning because it's about dinner time where I live. So being jet lagged, I will try to give my presentation. I would like to start by recalling a simple fact, but which needs to be recalled, I think, that norms, whether religious or else, do not stand magically as such in the public sphere. And to put it quite bluntly, we do not live with a cluster of norms above our heads that we would choose or pick one or another according to our specific needs, as a kind of reservoir in which we could well, pick up a norm or another. In the everyday world, which is the world that social scientists must be interested in, norms only achieve relevancy as they are embedded in actual contexts of instantiation, so to say, or actual contexts of enunciation. In the public sphere, this contexts are, can be alternatively scandals, debates, or controversies, among other moral categorization of the public sphere, or what we could also term generically as public events or media events. In this respect, one could say that the manufacturing of religious norms does not pre-exist its own context of enunciations. And two consequences can be drawn from this fact. First, that the very definition of norms is not set forever as such. It is constantly negotiated and renegotiated in the unfolding of a public event. And second, and correlatively, norms and their manufacturing are contingent upon the unfolding of public events such as scandals or controversies. Therefore, this implies that norms cannot be analyzed by social scientists away from their actual context of instantiation. In other words, if one wants to tackle with the problematic of normativity within the public sphere, what should be sought after should be the practical conditions of the production of norms and therefore the practicalities of media events such as scandals or controversies. In this regard, I would like to dedicate my presentation to introduce some aspects of what we could call a praxeological approach of media events or an ethnomethodological approach of scandals especially. And I will address two main points. The first one will consist in exposing some of the difficulties encountered in formal social sciences when tackling with the question of scandals. And the second point will be to set forward some elementary features of the alternative analysis I propose to eventually consider how it might help us understand how religious norms actually pop up in the public sphere as they have been increasingly doing these last years. So in order to do so, I will expose a few practical variables, not of the whole unfolding of a scandal, but at least its birth and its consolidation, by relying upon a research that I have led in Egypt, which concerned scandals in the political life under the rule of Hosni Mubarak, which I don't know would be his last years of reign. But before coming to this, let's start with the first point and let's address the main problem raised by scandals when social scientists want to take a hold of them. And there are mainly three difficulties which I would like to address here. First, if you have a look at different works dedicated to scandals, such as John B. Thompson's, or so-called scandalogists Markowitz and Serlostein, or in France, Damien Deblic and Cyril Lemieux, you will find out that they all ground their definition in the Latin origin and etymology of the word scandal, scandalon, and in its use in the Bible, under the meaning of stumbling block or stumbling stone, and pierre d'achoppement for French speakers. Apart from the aesthetical considerations, this definition is of absolutely no use. Not that much because I am concerned with scandals in an Arabic-speaking society, which population is dominantly Muslim, but it's simply that people don't have these references in mind when they use the word scandal. And even if there are Quran verses using the word fadiha or scandal, people don't have this in mind when they use the word in the everyday world. Sorry. So we have to, better than grounding this definition of the scandal in etymology, we have to rely upon or to acknowledge the sovereignty of ordinary people in the qualification of the situations in which they take part, by relying on what we could call a spontaneous or endogenous definition of the scandal. Now, second difficulty in formal social sciences, many works try to analyze the scandal by considering it whether from its causes or its social, political, electoral consequences. And in such a way that the process of the scandal itself becomes what Garfinkel would call the missing what. As a result, we are really lacking of works considering the scandal as such, that is, as a practical accomplishment. Now, third difficulty, the few works preoccupied by the scandal process, actually preoccupied by the scandal process, usually impose to it an unfolding structure previous to any analysis. Most of the time, this structure is inspired by the drama structure, and it consists in four phases. The pre-scandal phase, the scandal in itself, the culmination, and the aftermath. Now, such an attitude presents three problems for the analysis. The first one is that it amounts to explaining a phenomena by another, that is, explaining this scandal by the drama production. Second, it reduces the unfolding of scandal to some mere causal concatenations, and it imposes a teleological reasoning to its analysis. And finally, as a result of all this, it blurs the very foundations of the intelligibility of the scandal or of the phenomena we are supposed to analyze. Now, the fact is that each scandal has its own unfolding trajectory. To take an American example, think of the paradigmatic Watergate and compare its unfolding to the Iran-Contra scandal, and you will find out that both of them have very different unfolding trajectory. Now, this trajectory does not pre-exist the scandal, but it emerged contingently in the midst of the sequential interactions which are constitutive of this type of media phenomenon. Now, this is what I've been trying to do in my research on scandals in Egypt, and it consisted in the detailed analysis of the unfolding of three cases of scandal which occurred in 2005-2006. The first two cases can be categorized as sexual scandals, as they respectively dealt with the question of pedophilia and sexual harassment in Egypt, while the third one addressed the question of the Islamic headscarf. Now, for the limited purposes of this presentation, I will only speak of the latter case, but I have to stress the fact that the conclusions to which I have reached are drawn from the reproducibility of the empirical observation in all three cases. Now, as we have started to move on to the second point I want to address, let me give you a few or some elements of context about this Egyptian headscarf scandal before raising a few points about the birth and the consolidation of this scandal. The headscarf scandal broke out in November 2006 after the publication of declarations allegedly held by then Minister of Culture Farouk Hosni, in which he considered the headscarf as a mark of backwardness in the Egyptian society. A wide polemic ensued the publication of these declarations, the apex of which was a discussion in Parliament, and well, the scandal lasted for nearly a month before dying out. Now, this scandal did not break out in a vacuum, as it followed a month of intense polemic about the possibility for female students in Cairo University dorms to wear the integral veil, the niqab or burqa, not to mention other debates abroad that I will briefly consider in conclusion. It is also worthy to note that the declarations were held or published only 4 days before the reopening of the Egyptian parliament following the 2005 elections, in which the Muslim Brotherhood won a historical record of 88 seats out of 454. Now, in this context, the media and the press were the only arena within the public sphere where the debate could be held on the topic, at least during the first 4 days in the unfolding of the scandal. Interestingly, the beginning of the scandal did not match with the publication of Farouk Hosni's declaration, as the El Masr al-Yawm, the newspaper which published these declarations, did not seem to give them major importance in the first place, as they did not straight away hit the banner headline, and it was published and it was inserted in the inside pages at the very bottom of the home news page. It is only in the light of the reactions that followed the publication of the declaration that their newsworthiness was upgraded. In other words, if the article triggered the scandal, this letter effectively began after the first denunciation was made public. This first article is what we could call a trigger narrative for the scandal. And as this element has been observed in the analysis of the 2 other cases, one can say that a scandal does not come out of the blue. It has to ground on something public, something we could call a master document, towards which the participants will orient themselves to take part in the scandal. Coming back to the starting point of the scandal, the very first reaction or the very first act of denunciation came from the spokesperson of the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamdi Hassan. He's a spokesperson in the Egyptian parliament. Formally, his reaction was a procedural demand of communication, Bazian-UCB, which leaked into the press and paved the way for the discussion in Parliament. Now, beyond the fact that this first reaction immediately gave to the scandal an institutional dimension, and thus boosting its constitution, what is interesting about it for us is that it did not address directly the question of the headscarf as a religious norm, nor its infringement. If it did, it only did so indirectly through the disqualification of the person of the Minister of Culture, Farouk Hosni, through what Garfinkel calls a ceremony of degradation status. Now, it is striking to note that all the 3 cases that I've been studying begin with such a ceremony of degradation status, defined as a quote, a communicative work between individuals whereby the public identity of an actor is transformed into something else considered as inferior on the local scale of social types. In other words, it's a work of qualification and disqualification, relying upon a rhetoric of irony and biographical re-examination. Now, it would take too much time to expose the 8 conditions of the successfulness of this kind of ceremony and how they are actualized in Hamdi Hassan's demand of communication. But what is important to note is that this letter takes defense of what he holds as religious norms, that is, the headscarf, not positively, but only by way of disqualifying the denounced person on a personal level. This was even more striking as the topic was discussed under the dome of the parliament after the scandal was consolidated in its early stages of unfolding in the media. If the debate was very heated, it is worthy to note that both the majority, Mubarak's party, both the majority and the opposition, whether it be the religious opposition or the tiny secular opposition, condemned Farouk Hosni for his declarations. In fact, the only cleavage which emerged concerned the question of whether these declarations were held as personal statements or whether it reflected a more general tendency on behalf of the regime. In fact, in unanimity, the members of parliament refused totally to discuss the question of the headscarf as such, as they considered it as intangible, an intangible religious prescription. As a whole, it appears that the MPs, as well as the journalists, showed what Jean-Noël Ferrier calls a negative solidarity on the subject of the headscarf. That is, a solidarity that does not result of a convergence of views on the topic, but from the difficulty to show public discord regarding this question, the question of the headscarf. Eventually, this institutional sequence did not mark the end of the polemic, as it lasted for nearly a whole month, as I said. It was only after a long postponed institutional reconciliation between the Minister of Culture and a group of MPs that the scandal came to an end. And also, as it entered within the public sphere, it entered in competition with other emerging topics in the news, both in Egypt and in the region. And to conclude, there are two points I would like to make to index some intertextuality with other contributions in this conference, dealing with other contexts. First, as I have mentioned previously, the scandal did not break in a vacuum, and it was preceded by other debates both in Egypt and abroad. Indeed, it broke out only 2 years after the promulgation of the French law on the headscarf, banning the headscarf in public spaces, places, and a month after Jack Straw's declarations concerning the niqab in Britain. In this respect, there is a clear convergence of international debates concerning religious norms, as what was suggested in the conference argumentative note. But the recasting of these debates in the Egyptian public sphere was slightly different from what was at stake in the secular context of France and in multicultural England. On the one hand, in opposition with the French and the English cases, in Egypt there was a political force in parliament which was able to take position in favor of the headscarf. We didn't have that in France or in England. On the other hand, and even though it is slightly different, it was in slightly different terms in Egypt, what seemed to be at stake in all cases was, as Professor Olivier Roy said, was national identity. Even in Egypt, is the headscarf part of our national identity or not? And in France, is secularism part of our identity? Now, before ending, I would like to have a quick word on the Egyptian public sphere after what Egyptians called the 25th of January revolution. As Professor Olivier Roy early mentioned in different articles, in opposition with the main paradigm of political sciences in the region, this revolution was essentially non-religious in nature. However, in the aftermath of this revolution, a counter-revolution has been threatening and is still threatening the achievement of the revolution. And it's relying on two things, in Egypt at least. The first is sectarian conflicts or tensions between Copts and Muslims. And the second one is a kind of updating of old debates concerning religious norms and specifically concerning the headscarf, whether it be on television, on public television, in the university dorms, or during exams at university also. In some ways, this tends to prove that what was difficult to document before the toppling of Mubarak's rule, that the regime massively resorted to such meanings as public debates and scandals about religious norms in order to factualize or to put some flesh on the Islamist threat which allowed the maintaining of his authoritarian regime for 30 years. To conclude on a positive note, but without risking any prospective analysis on Egypt, let's hope that the toppling of Mubarak's rule will put an end to this kind of misuse. We can dream, but this kind of misuses of religious norms in the Egyptian public sphere. And I thank you for your attention. Thank you.
I'd like to turn to Professor Charles Hirschkind from Anthropology Department here at UC Berkeley, and most recently appointed to chair the Religious Studies program. We don't have a Religious Studies department, but we have a program, so we're looking for exciting new initiatives to come forth from this coming year.
Thank you, Hatem. Funny microphone. Enrique, thank you for that very thoughtful and interesting paper. I should say this is the first time I've heard this and did not get a chance to read it beforehand, so we'll make a few comments, and then hopefully collectively we can forge a kind of discussion about it. One of the things I was thinking of whenever the question of religious norms in the public sphere comes up, and I'm thinking about the context of Egypt, is Tocqueville's old remark about the United States in the 19th century. You know, when he comes to the U.S. and says, well, that in some sense there's a kind of Christian morality that reigns so supreme and that so shapes the kind of shape of the debates within the public arena. The public arena is left relatively free of religion, because religion is the unspoken background which shapes the moral framework of the participants in such a strong way. So it seems to me one question of the public sphere could come out of that way, the way in which, for example, thinking about the public sphere as a space of discursive interaction, to what extent do we see that a certain kind of religious traditions shaped the protocols of discourse, styles of argument, the kind of issues, the boundaries of what's considered relevant and irrelevant, and so on. Now, I know you don't address that directly, but I'm just trying to sort of lay on the table what might be approaches to the question of religious norms in the public sphere. And there, the question is thinking about the public sphere as, let's say, in a slightly more Habermasian vein, right, as a space in which a kind of critical discourse unfolds, and what are the discursive protocols that shape the boundaries of that discourse, and what is relevant and irrelevant, and what kind of arguments carry weight and don't, and so on. Now, I think you're quite right in the end when you say that the Mubarak regime instrumentally both used and to some extent manufactured or exploited scandals as a means of furthering its own politics and perhaps demonizing or identifying certain dangers in society. I think that's a correct assessment. I mean, the questions that come up for me are when you talk about religious norms entering the public sphere. One question would be are you suggesting that there's a certain kind of let's call it a style of religiosity, or even let's just call it religious norms, for which the public sphere is the cauldron within which they are produced, and within which certain norms acquire force in society. That is, and then you could think, therefore, the institutions of public life, and particularly the media that you're talking about, you'd be focusing on the way in which those institutions mediate and force and determine to some extent what comes to be taken and lived as public norms. And I don't know if you were saying that in some sense, because in one way, if I think of the United States, let's say there's a debate about a creche in public or something. The question, are we speaking about religious norms in the public sphere there, or are we simply speaking about let's say, the appropriate space of religion of religious symbols within a secular society? And therefore, the arguments themselves are not necessarily religious or based in religious norms, we might say, but are actually, right, or are understood through the lens of a kind of commitment to secularity. And what are the proper boundaries authorized by that secularity and so on. See what I mean? So that would be in some way not the sort of force of a religious norm in shaping public debate, but a debate about, let's say, within a secular framework of what's the place of religion and the proper place for it and so on. I know I'm raising a set of questions that are somewhat around and tangential to your paper, but I think if we're going to debate more largely the question about religious norms in the public sphere, that's one thing. The other thing, you emphasize at the beginning how important scandal and controversy is for the question of religious norms. Now, when I think about religious norms, right, I'm thinking about practices and about those practices that have a kind of social institutional depth, such that they, right, have their normative force is grounded in their being embedded and embodied as. So they're not sort of something that are produced. They're not dependent, let's say, on their invocation in moments of scandal, let's say, in a kind of media debates. But they, in some way, provide a kind of, right, a sort of normative background within which such debates emerge. So I'm just saying the whole question about the embeddedness of certain practices, religious, let's say, practices indebted to religious traditions, seems to be necessary to address that if we're going to speak about religious norms in the public sphere. Things that are not simply transparent to discourse, simply that are not put into, not simply debated discursively, but actually shape the forms of debate and so on. And that would be speaking about, therefore, the pervasive force of certain norm that we might call religious in shaping public and political life. All of these things we should talk about together more broadly. I think, let me say something about your comment about the revolution, because that's something I've been thinking about too. And that is when you call it non-religious and so on. I think you're right that that's a good way to characterize it. But I also want to characterize it as non-secular as well in ways. And I don't know, perhaps we can talk about that. But what was striking to me is how little the dichotomy between secular and religious, what little role it played in shaping the forms of interaction and discourse and even commentary on the events. Take, for example, the collective scenes of collective prayer that are so commonly viewed in Tahrir. Now, I've heard very few people comment on that as evidence of the force of religious norms in shaping. And yet any other time we see large bodies in collective prayer, particularly in context of political action, we'd be very worried about the instrumental use of religion for political ends and how there's a kind of blurring of boundaries and so on. So it was interesting that those scenes, neither have I heard from Egyptians there, nor have I heard from people outside, did not provoke that kind of response of, aha, my God, what's going on here? There's, in this excellent democratic unfolding, there's the danger of a certain kind of religious practices are being inserted into it, and are, and it's curious that worry did not. I'm sure a few people were worried, but it's curious how little comment was made of that, and it struck me that overall the whole question about, if we think of that dichotomy as a kind of part of a political rationale that questions the secularity or religiosity as of practices, a certain kind of interrogation that is, essential, let's say, to the reasoning of modern states when they, and it's embedded in law, a certain question about what's the proper domain of the religious versus the secular and so on. Those practices, the whole question seemed to be absent. It wasn't that was a religious practice, nor was it a secular practice. It was the practice of the collective there, a collective whose actions were not being determined or were not being framed or described through the lens offered by those twin categories. Now, those categories in Egypt, as you know, have so powerfully schematized political life for years, throughout the world. But if you think in Egypt, the power of distinctions between, is that a secular or is that a religious argument? Is that party secular or are they religious? Is that a violation of certain kind of religious, secular commitments to the state, and so on? All of those questions have shaped and limited political life in powerful ways in Egypt for years. And now, as you're saying now, it's happening very forcefully, right? This whole sort of invocation of religious norms and so on. But in that moment, it struck me, it was completely absent. That whole, I mean, I'm sure there'll be exceptions we can point to, but in some way, what was striking about it was that a certain kind of a certain kind of democratic exercise was being elaborated outside the rationale authorized by that binary, which is a very interesting, it seems to me, in thinking about possibilities outside of the tyranny of those categories. So I'll just open this up, and Olivier, I think, also was going to make a few comments. So
the scandals you referred to are part, were part of constant debate, but polemical debate, during the time of the dictatorships on religious norms. And in fact, when the political space was closed, this so-called religious space, but I agree it's also a political space, it's not, but in a sense, a debate on religious norms were possible, while truly political debates were not possible. So this debate, these polemics on scandals played a big role, not only in Egypt, but Egypt is a very interesting case. So you have the story you mentioned. You had also the Hizbah story with Nasr Abu Zaid, the cancellation of his marriage. The fact that actors were able to challenge, the political order by pushing for religious norms that which the state cannot ignore, But of course, pushing these religious norms had a tremendous political impact on the relationship between state and society and on the legitimacy of the state. So it was a way to challenge also the legitimacy of the regime. The apostasy debate also played a big role in that, by trying, by forcing the state to give up, in a sense, its monopole on public order and power, and forcing the state to accept norms which are not defined by the state. Not only not defined by the state because it's religious norms, but also where the actors are not actors of the regime, so individual actors. And it had a lot of destabilizing effect for the state. But what happens when suddenly the political space is open? What happened with the actors who used to push for implementation of religious norms, independently of the context, when suddenly there is at least an open space of debate and of freedom. And something which is interesting now, so I'm taking the example I'm quoting not from my fieldworks because I didn't go there since the events, but we had recently a workshop at the Institute in Florence, and some people came from Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, and Egypt. And it was very interesting because most of our interlocutors were, part of what we call liberal Islamists, PJD in Morocco, the left of the Muslim Brothers, people of the Nahdat in Tunisia. And they said the same thing, while the contexts are very different. So the mainstream so-called Islamist parties are, dealing with, their own acceptation of democracy, of free elections, of building a political party, accepting, contestation, and not trying to impose an Islamic state or Sharia or anything. So. But the actors who were pushing for the Islamic norms before are still there. No, they call them Salafi. I don't want to debate on what Salafism is, but the term is used, So, and the Salafi are coming and said, you are forgetting the Islamic norms. For instance, in Egypt, a Christian governor has been appointed. It's not the first time, but a Christian governor has been appointed. So there was a demonstration opposing, in the name of the Islamic norms, the appointment of a Christian governor. And the Salafi are challenging, the Islamists, the Muslim Brothers, the Nahdat, and the PGD, saying, so we have a clear case here where we may forget the norms, the religious norm, in the name of democracy, of citizenship, and so. But you should not. You shouldn't. You have democracy maybe is good, but we should put the Islamic norm first. And according to them, of course, a Christian could not be appointed. So the Muslim Brothers had to answer in political terms, and not in theological terms. So they didn't, to my knowledge, you may know better, they didn't say, Omar did that, so and so, we have, so. No, they say, well, there is no problem in appointing a Christian governor. No. Same with Hanouchi in Tunisia. He is not trying to find, an Islamic narrative to explain why Nahdat is now, or maybe it was before, but is a democratic party pushing for citizenship. He's not trying to find an Islamic narrative. But there is this permanent overbidding, of the Salafists, and which, by the way, obliged the mainstream Islamic parties to say, okay, it's democracy, so we have to refer to a different set of norms. Of course, we still think that Article 2 the Egyptian constitution should be kept, maintaining that Islam is the religion of the state, and so and so. But they are pushed to accept the autonomy of democratic norms and rules of the game, which is interesting. But even the Salafi are now, pushing for Islamic norms in a space which is far more open. And there is a problem. For instance, when in Egypt they attacked Sufi graves, they had in front of them not just the answer of a religious community, but also the answer of the population. Saying, what you are doing, it's not time to attack Sufi graves or Christian churches. It's from the past. Now we have to, you are destroying, running against the movement. And it's, so we are here now. But it's also a challenge for the Salafi, how to express, their will to still stick with the idea that there should be religious, the religious norms should be the norm in the public sphere, with a democratic open space. And they are, my impression is that they are very embarrassed, because in fact, because they are not confronted with the police, they are not confronted with the regime, but they are confronted with people who want to discuss, who come to them and say, let's discuss. And they are not used to that. Same thing, by the way, inside the Coptic Church. Until now, recently, the clergy succeeded, in being the representative of the Coptic community. And in fact was quite happy to have the religious affiliations expressed in terms of identity, belonging to a community, and so on and so on. No. But the society of the clergy, Coptic clergy, is also challenged by some young Christians who say, no, citizenship and democracy. But also, it has a translation in terms of religious freedom. If it's citizenship, then everybody can change. It's not an issue, for a Copt to convert to Islam or for a Muslim to convert to Christianity. But it's still an issue, by definition. So we have, an interesting process of changing the nature of the debate on religious norms when the political space is suddenly open. And here, I agree with what Charles said, it's not an issue of secularization versus religion. Religious attitude, like praying in public, doesn't have the same meaning. And if we compare with the Islamic revolution of Iran, it's very interesting to see the difference of the exhibition, if I can say that, of religious practices in public sphere. In Iran, to pray in the streets was a clear sign of political protest. Apparently, not in Tahrir. No. It's okay. It's banalization, in a sense, sort of normalization of religion. So it's not a process of secularization. It's a process of normalization of religious freedom and practices, I think. And of course, it's too soon, to make definitive theories, although we are paid for to make theories, to teach theories. But it's something we have which might change or put a new input in our debate on the religious norms public sphere.
I would like to open to questions and discussion from the rest, but if I just may add a little bit of context, I think the Egyptian revolution, and well as the Tunisian revolution, is still a work in progress. I think the place or the presence of Islam and also Christianity within the revolution period, as well as the post-revolution, still have to be investigated. More research has to be done. I think we could speak that not all organizations and groups that have attributed Islam to their identity were on the same side. I think the Salafis were decisively against the revolution, considering the statements that they issued. The Sufis and the various Sufi tariqas within Egypt were against the revolution. And therefore, we have to actually research their pre-revolution position as they attempt to try to recapture some of the lost credibility by becoming more religious than the religious. And I think there has to be some research in there. So I'm looking at that part of attempting to capture lost space. And what do? You try to become more religious and attacking Christian sites as well as Sufi sites. So I'm saying that that's still research that's to be done and to be followed. What I think is very clear is that an analysis that tries to once again look at the binary, secular versus religious. And I think in the Egyptian context, that binary was not present. But I agree with Charles that to say that the religion was not a part of the revolution, I think you just have to focus on why was it that Friday was the largest gathering that took place on a regular basis and became part and parcel of the mobilization that taking place. And therefore, even today in Yemen, almost 4 million are out on the street on Friday, in Syria likewise. So we have to rethink about how religion plays within the larger Arab and Muslim world in the following period. But once again, we are talking here in a crystal ball without having the primary research done. And many of us might be demonstrated to be either wrong or don't have the facts on our ground after we actually carry out the analysis. I just wanted actually to maybe begin by a question. You looked at the etymology of scandal, but you didn't pursue the etymology in Arabic, the concept of fadiha, right? Having fadaha yafdah fadiha as an etymology, which is actually the demarcation between public and private space in relations to both the political and the religious. So how this fadiha as a concept in the public space also connected to some religious norms as it relates to how the society functions in relations of the attempt or constantly to hide or to veil the private space even at the higher level of political discourses. You could answer, or if anybody would like to jump and
perhaps you can ask first.
Yeah. Let's get up as many questions as we can.
Yeah.
Don't forget I'm alone.
Huh?
I'm alone.
He's alone. Don't worry, you're not alone in Berkeley.
No.
We have a lot of support for you. Anyone? Questions?
No?
I haven't seen so many people that are
I have.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your talks. I had a question for Professor Klaus and a commentary for Professor Hirschkind. The question I had for you was about you talked about the contextual factors that are key when one is to define what is scandalous, what is not, and so on. And I heard you say a lot of things, but I did not hear you talk about the nature of the headscarf phenomena in the Egyptian context. What I mean by that is, having lived in Egypt for quite a bit, the way I see that phenomena would be very key to actually defining why is it that Farouk Hosni's comments were scandalous in a way. That is to say that, as you probably know, the headscarf in Egypt over the past maybe 15 to 20 years has become more or less something of a very mundane religious practice, not particularly an expression of, definitely not an expression of a religious political stance in society, increasingly a result of almost an overriding social norm, an overarching social conformity kind of phenomena, and not particular or not always an expression of religious piety. So, given all these kind of the different connotations that the headscarf has taken, especially in urban Egyptian cities, what you said hit me as, of course his comments were going to be absurd, and of Farouk Hosni's comments, and of course there was what you call the negative consensus among the seculars, the leftists, and the Islamists alike, and in parliament, of basically not engaging in a real conversation about the validity of those claims, even if there was agreement about them on the part of the seculars and the leftists, simply because in such a scene in which the headscarf became what it is as a symbol in the public sphere in Cairo especially, the comments were viewed as absurd, even if valid for certain political inclinations. So that was my question. Did you consider the headscarf in context, so to speak? Because I think it has the very different connotations in other contexts, say Iran, for instance. For Professor Hirschkind, I was just intrigued by the question about the extent to which the religious norms shaped public debate. And what's striking me now, and this is just a comment, in the post-revolutionary time in Egypt, is that both on what usually we would think of as the secular liberal side, or on the part of liberals who also have been renowned to be seculars in the Egyptian scene, and on the part of the Islamists, there is a certain caution from deviating from a conception of religion as definitely shaping what we are discussing in the public sphere. So just to give an example, the liberals are more and more emphasizing that their political platforms are not about shunning religion out of the public sphere, and not even about separating religion and politics as such, but about, and I use the exact terms they do, regulating the relationship between religion and politics, allowing religion to shape public discourse, and therefore intervene in the political process through shaping the public good, or the conception of public good and public interest, even if not a codified law. So when you talk about how religious norms shape public debate, that very much struck me, especially in what is conventionally known in Egypt as the secular liberal discourse. Even the secular liberals, if they want to attain any air of legitimacy in the current public debate, have to play by the rules of the game, even if, on the personal level, I know some of them, even if it goes against personal beliefs of political heads of those parties. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation and the discussion points. I just had a question, maybe it's more theoretical, but just in terms of the work of events themselves, to allow us to rethink certain kinds of categories, whether they're around what constitutes a secular or religious, how do local practices relate to kind of global phenomena, what US or European involvements are in, for one example, the revolution. And because you began talking about media, and I was thinking that, you know, all of these relationships in some ways are mediated, right? I mean, our experience of the revolution, as Dr. Bazian was also saying, I mean, these are not necessarily facts on ground. I mean, they're mediated to us in certain ways. And so the question I have is, you know, what makes the Egyptian revolution more palatable to us? You know, so there's questions. Professor Mahmoud just recently gave a paper on, you know, the issue of violence, nonviolence. Something that's nonviolent makes it relevant because they can be democratic just like us. So it's really about them, it's their revolution, but it makes it palatable to us because we can digest this kind of nonviolent nature. But what's spectacular about all of this is the ways in which all of these categories are blurred, right? Secular and religious, local, global, male, female, all of these things come together in ways that we haven't imagined. So I guess the question I have is, given not just the incredible ways in which this particular event has given rise to these kinds of questions, what do you think is happening theologically? Just at a theological level, what does it say in terms of reshaping or rethinking norms? Because as Charles said, as Professor Hirschkind said, you know, it's not just about norms entering a public sphere. The public sphere, events, scandals also create opportunities for us to rethink categories, but rethink embodied acts, right? It's not just about how we're going to mediate something or how we're going to talk about our identity or narrate it through discourses, but they're actual embodied acts and practices that are then reconstituted. So I guess the question, to put it short, is really about, you know, what do these events permit us to think about in terms of the reenactments of religious identity, if we can call it that, or the role of kind of theology in all of this? What's changed in terms of those norms?
I have 3 pages of questions, so I will try to answer. Some are overlapping, some are not. But, well, to begin with, this young lady's question about the contextual factors, I was contextualizing for this. For the purposes of my speech, but actually I don't. Well, it's. I think there is a question of epistemological choices on my behalf. As I said, I'm working in ethnomethodology, that is with a radical conception of context, which is I cannot talk of context as something that's in the air. It has to be documented with I mean, as I work on written parts of media, I have to see in the media what's relevant within the text and not what's my own conception of the context. So I'm with you, definitely with you. After 8 years living in Cairo, there is not one single definition of the headscarf in Egypt. Even, I mean, you have different names for the veil. I mean, for the same act of veiling oneself, of putting a headscarf on one's head, and each one tends to have moral implication, like the hijab, isnad, which is with the long to cover the breast, or what else? We don't use burqa, which is what we use in France, for instance, la burqa, which, I mean, in Egypt, it's not audible at all. It's the same thing. I mean, a woman which is not showing anything of her face except her eyes. So I'm wondering about the moral implications that is behind the different categorization. Why do we use burqa in France, whereas I'm pretty sure most of the women who are veiling themselves in France use the term niqab, which is coming from the Gulf and not from Afghanistan or something. So that's one way of answering this question of the context. Well, it can be moral, but it's certainly a fashion trend also. I mean, you can have the headscarf that it's matching with the purse or the shoes or stuff. I mean, it's fashionable. It is. But concerning the origin of this scandal, it was supposed to be declarations of the record on behalf of Farouk Hosni. He was having, how do you call it, a meeting with journalists, a press conference, and he saw this woman from El Ahram who used to be without headscarf and happened to be wearing the headscarf on that very day. So he had a comment on that's a sign of backwardness, and some woman, a woman journalist who happens to be wearing the headscarf also, write it down in an article. But in the first place, it was just, well, Farouk Hosni declared that the veil is a sign of backwardness, without saying that's good, that's bad, without any comment. That's in the aftermath, when the Muslim Brotherhood, especially Hamdi Hassan, took hold of this grip, or has a grip on these declarations, that it has become a scandal. Once again, it's linked with my epistemological choices, that I don't consider that in itself it is a subject of scandal. It was just some conditions of felicity that made it a scandal, I think. Now, after in linkage with this question about the shaping of the public sphere with religious norms, once again, it's pretty hard to talk about Egypt now because things hopefully are changing. So, but until or during Mubarak's rule, there was this. But I think it might also be the case afterwards. There is this argumentative constraint that when someone introduces an Islamic an argument, then you cannot answer to it. I mean, that's something you cannot challenge in a way. And you have, at the same time, you have the obligation to answer in religious terms. It doesn't work if you say, well, but on behalf of the human rights, this is not true. No, we don't care. That's a question of truth, of truth programs, as Paul Vane says. Each religion, each ideology has its own definition of truth, and there's no overlapping possible between between different ideologies. What else? It's pretty hard to answer on the theological point of view about the how would you say that? What it contains, what the norms, the religious norms contains. Considering the latest developments after the revolution, I'm quite amazed at the role of Al-Azhar in the aftermath of the revolution, as they are emerging as a kind of in-between, and even the Muslim Brothers are a kind of in-between, have a kind of in-between role between the Salafi on one part, whatever they are, whoever they are, and, well, pro-democratic people. You had this, the arsoning of a church?
In Alexandria?
No, that was before after the revolution in south of Cairo. Someone put fire in a church, and then there was this sectarian tensions, and Al-Azhar sent a delegation there to make some kind of reconciliation, sulh, between the people of the village, and it usually it was the National Democratic Party, the NDP, that was carrying this role. In Qina, for instance, it happened in 2007, and the NDP was making the reconciliation. Now it's Al-Azhar. And even when nowadays Salafi are demonstrating in the case of Camellia, I don't know if you heard of this conversion case, a young Coptic woman who has converted to Islam, and then she has disappeared, and people pretend that the church has kidnapped her and stuff. So now you have Salafi demonstrating. It's been a month now. Every Friday, they're demonstrating in front of Masjid al-Nur, and to ask for the army to show Camellia, and they say, we want our sister Camellia and stuff. So now she's supposed to appear publicly within the 2 weeks. But here again, the Muslim Brothers, with their new party, they emerge as a kind of moderate or in between the Salafi and people who have democratic considerations. And that's striking about this morning. Olivier Roy was talking about the Turkish model of moderate Islamic party. Even the Muslim Brothers, they choose, well, they didn't choose the very same name, but they choose the Party of Liberty and and Justice. So justice is here. Al-Hurriya, liberty or freedom is because of Tahrir, because of the liberation place, or I guess, so they want to stick on what happened, or to be close to the revolution, and at the same time take the name which recalls somehow the role of the Turkish political party. Where should I?
One more.
D'accord. Well, concerning the revolution as itself, okay, there was, I'm with you, there was this scenes of collective prayer on Tahrir. This is part of the religious, it's pretty religious. I mean, people are pretty religious in Egypt. So, well, I had this friend of mine who took me to Tahrir during the revolution. His father is part of the Muslim Brotherhood. I used to live in Manial, where the headquarters of Muslim Brotherhood was. And he had several members of his family from the Muslim Brothers, and he defined himself as independent. And he was praying on Tahrir, and a French journalist came and told him, "You're a Muslim brother?" And he said, "No, I just pray, but that doesn't mean I'm a Muslim brother. It's just like this, you know." So this picture of people of collective prayers on Tahrir was it was sexy as for journalists to have this huge. It's a beautiful scene to see people like one body bowing down, so it's a sexy picture to put in the press. But I think at the very beginning, the regime was trying to use this to say, here, these are the Muslim brothers who are behind the whole scene, even though they didn't call for demonstrations. This time for 25th of January and for the 6th of April in 2008, they were aloof from everything. So it was in the Western countries, in Western media, it was seen as a Islamic movement, but it was not. And in Egypt, it was only a question of collective, Christians and Muslims hand in hands. You had the Masr al-Yawm cover page with this, and Al-Waft also. With while people were praying, there were other peoples protecting them from the attacks from thugs. And this, in the Copts have a tattoo of the cross, and there was this guy was holding someone else guy, and he was protecting Muslims praying while he was a Christian, and there was the visual element to prove it. So within Egypt, it was used as a national unity item for the revolution. I will stop here. I will keep on informing.
Thank you, Enrique. Thank you, Charles. And thank you for everyone for your participation. I think we're going to move to lunch. We don't want to hold you away from food. Definitely this session will have much for us to think about, and we're going to continue to think and write about it for a long time to come. Thank you.